The rain, a constant, soft drumming against the window pane of our Seattle apartment, used to be a comfort. It was the soundtrack to cozy evenings on the couch, wrapped in a blanket with Clara, maybe watching a movie or just talking about our day. Now it sounds like accusation. Each drop a tiny hammer blow against the fragile glass of my reality. My reality, the one where Clara and I, married for 10 years, were a solid, unbreakable unit. 10 years. A decade. We built a life here in the Pacific Northwest, a comfortable, predictable rhythm. Weekends hiking in the Cascades when the weather allowed, or exploring new breweries in Ballard when it didn't. Weeknights cooking together, sharing stories from our jobs. I'm a software engineer, she's in marketing at a big tech firm downtown. It wasn't a fairy tale, sure, but it was ours. It felt safe. It felt permanent. I'm Alex, 38 years old, average height, average build, wear glasses. Got a bit of a receding hairline I try not to dwell on, but it's there, a quiet reminder of time passing, of things changing whether you want them to or not. Clara, she's 36, vibrant, always buzzing with energy. She never made me feel less because of the hairline or my quiet nature. She used to call me her steady anchor, her harbour in the storm. I believed her. I believed us. The change started subtly, a new spring in her step. A different way she did her hair, a perfume I didn't recognize, something floral and sharp, not the warm, familiar scent she'd worn for years. She started staying late at work more often, citing big projects. When she was home, her phone was practically glued to her hand. I'd catch her smiling at it, a soft, private smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when she looked up at me. She talked about work more too, specifically about Julian. He was new to her team, apparently some kind of marketing wonderkin they'd poached from a rival firm. Tall, charismatic, full of big ideas and easy laughter. At first it was just work stuff. Julian had this brilliant idea for the campaign. Julian is so funny, he had us all in stitches. Harmless office banter, I told myself. Everyone has colleagues they click with, right? But the mentions grew more frequent. The tone in her voice when she said his name shifted, a little brighter, a little breathier. She'd trail off mid-sentence about something else to say, "Oh, Julian was telling me about." It was like he was a gravity well, pulling her thoughts, her attention, away from me, away from us. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach, a cold dread seeping in, but I pushed it down. Don't be insecure, Alex. Don't be that guy. It's just work. It's just a new colleague. People get excited about new colleagues. The night she told me, the rain was doing exactly what it's doing now, a soft, relentless patter. We were on the couch, a bottle of wine open between us, the same couch where we'd shared so many quiet, happy moments. She was a little flushed from the wine, but her eyes were clear, too clear, focused. "Alex," she said, her voice low, serious. "We need to talk." My heart rate spiked. This was it. The conversation I'd been dreading without fully admitting I was dreading it. "Okay," I managed, my voice a little hoarse. She took a deep breath. There's something I need to be honest about. I've developed feelings for Julian." The knot in my stomach twisted violently. I just stared at her, Julian. The name felt like a physical blow. "I can't stop thinking about him," she continued, rushing the words out now, as if getting them out quickly would lessen their impact. "And I think we should consider opening our marriage." My brain slammed to a halt. Opening. Our marriage. The words didn't compute. They bounced around in my skull like rogue electrons, making no sense in the context of our 10 years, our life, our vows. "What?" I finally whispered, the word barely audible. "Opening it," she repeated, more firmly this time, "so I can explore these feelings with Julian." It was so blunt, so direct, not a hesitant question but a statement, a proposal laid out like a business plan. My mouth felt dry. My hands were shaking. I don't understand," I stammered. "Opening, like seeing other people." "Yes," she said, almost impatiently. "Specifically, I want to see Julian. I feel like I need to explore this connection. It could even be good for us, Alex. A way to grow, to bring new energy into the marriage." I couldn't breathe. Good for us? Exploring a connection with another man, the man she couldn't stop thinking about, the man she found irresistible, was going to be good for us. It felt like she was speaking a foreign language, one designed specifically to inflict maximum pain. I can't," I said, finding my voice a little. "Clara, I don't want an open marriage. That's not what we agreed to." Her expression hardened instantly. The flush left her cheeks, replaced by a defensive pallor. "Don't be insecure, Alex," she said, her voice sharp. "This isn't about you not being enough. It's about me needing to explore something, to understand myself better. Julian, he embodies a part of me I feel like I've lost, a spontaneity, a drive." She trailed off, but the damage was done. "It's not about you not being enough." But it felt exactly like that. And then she went there. "Honestly," she continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, "is this really about me and Julian, or is it just your general insecurity acting up? Like how you get about your hairline?" My breath hitched. The hairline. The thing I tried so hard not to think about. The quiet vulnerability I thought she accepted. She was using it as a weapon. To dismiss my shock, my hurt, my fundamental objection to her plan to pursue another man. "You think this is about my hairline?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "My wife tells me she wants to sleep with her co-worker, and you think my problem is my hair?" "That's not what I said," she snapped, but her eyes flickered. "I'm saying you're reacting from a place of insecurity. You're afraid of losing control, of not being the only one. This is about my journey of self-discovery." Self-discovery. It sounded so noble when she said it. Like she was embarking on some spiritual quest, and I was the villain standing in her way, trying to force her to stay small, stay contained within the boring confines of our monogamous life, the life we built. "My journey?" I echoed, the numbness starting to creep in, a protective layer over the raw wound. "What about our journey? What about the journey we've been on for 10 years? Does that just end now? Because you find someone else appealing?" "It doesn't have to end," she insisted, though her conviction felt brittle. "It could evolve, be stronger." I looked at her, really looked at the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, and she felt like a stranger, this cold, rational, self-focused person proposing to dismantle our life for a crush. "I can't," I said again, my voice flat. The numbness was spreading, dulling the edges of the pain, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating weight. "I can't do this." We sat in silence for a long time after that, the rain drumming, the air thick with unspoken words, with betrayal, with the wreckage of everything I thought we were. She didn't press further that night. She just got up, took her glass, and went to bed, leaving me alone on the couch with the ghost of our marriage. Current part characters, 4,000. Total characters, 4,000. The days that followed were a blur of tension and silence. We moved around each other in the apartment like wary strangers. The shared space, once our sanctuary, felt like a battleground of unspoken accusations and raw hurt. Every mundane activity, making coffee, getting ready for work, sitting down for a meal, was fraught with the weight of what had been said and what hadn't. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind was a relentless loop, replaying the conversation, her words, her face when she'd used my hairline against me. "Is this just your general insecurity acting up?" The phrase dug into my brain like a tick burrowing deep. Was she right? Was I just being a fearful, insecure husband, clinging to outdated notions of marriage? In a world where relationship structures were evolving, was I the one who was stuck, preventing her from growth? I paced the apartment after she went to bed, the floorboards creaking complaints under my feet. I'd look out the window at the city lights blurred by the perpetual P&W mist, searching for answers in the hazy glow. What did she mean Julian embodied a part of her she'd lost? What part? The spontaneous, driven woman she was before. Before us. Did she resent the life we'd built? Did she see it as a cage? The thought was a fresh stab of pain. I had seen our life as a partnership, a mutual creation, a safe harbor. Had she seen it as a compromise, a sacrifice? And was Julian, this charismatic, successful figure, the key to unlocking a suppressed version of herself? It twisted the knife further. It wasn't just about sex or romance. It was about her fundamental dissatisfaction, a dissatisfaction she was projecting onto this other man and demanding I facilitate her exploration of it. I needed to talk to someone. Not my family. They loved Clara, and explaining this felt impossible, like admitting a catastrophic failure. My friend Ben. He was grounded, pragmatic, and knew us both, but wasn't so close that he'd take sides or freak out. I called him and mumbled something about needing to grab coffee. We met at a quiet cafe in Fremont, the kind with mismatched fur and the smell of roasted beans heavy in the air. The city outside felt distant, muffled by the cafe's cosy hum. I laid it all out, the subtle changes, the confession, the proposal, the self-discovery justification, the cruel jab about my hairline. Ben listened patiently, stirring his coffee slowly, his expression serious. When I finished, the silence stretched, broken only by the clatter of cups and the gentle murmur of other conversations. "Man," he said finally, shaking his head. "That's a lot, Alex. I'm really sorry." "Am I crazy?" I asked, the question I'd been asking myself endlessly. Is this just how things are now? Like, are monogamous people dinosaurs? Ben leaned forward. "No, Alex, you're not crazy. And no, this isn't just how things are. Look, open marriages exist. They work for some people, but they work when both people genuinely want it, when it's built on communication and trust, not when one person drops a bomb because they have a crush on someone else and demands the other person go along with it for self-discovery." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And using your hairline as a way to dismiss your feelings? That's not okay, man. That's not communication. That's deflection. That's trying to make you feel small so her demand seems bigger, more important." His words were like a lifeline. They validated the churning storm of hurt and confusion inside me. It wasn't just me being insecure. It was her being something else. Selfish, cruel, desperate. I didn't know. "She makes it sound like I'm holding her back," I said, feeling the familiar weight of self-doubt pressed down, like I'm preventing her from being fully herself. "She's framing it that way," Ben agreed. "But think about it. If she wants to explore this spontaneous, driven part of herself, why does it have to involve Julian? Why does it have to involve opening the marriage? Why can't she explore that within the marriage? Pick up a new hobby, travel, change jobs. Why does it have to be this specific person?" He was right. The self-discovery felt like a thin veneer over a very specific desire for Julian. It wasn't about growth in general, it was about growth with him. "So what do?" I asked, feeling lost. "I love her, Ben. 10 years. Our life." "I know," he said softly, "but she's asking you to fundamentally change the nature of your relationship, to compromise something that's clearly essential to you, monogamy, trust, security, for her to pursue someone else. You get to say no, Alex. You have the right to say no, and you have the right to be hurt, profoundly hurt." He didn't have easy answers, but talking to him helped anchor me. It pulled me back from the brink of believing I was the one who was broken. The problem wasn't my insecurity. The problem was that the person I trusted most was asking me to betray my own values and ignore my pain for her perceived happiness with someone else. I decided I had to try and talk to her again, clearly, directly, not from a place of shock, but from a place of reasoned hurt and firm boundaries. I spent the next few days rehearsing what I would say in my head, trying to anticipate her reactions. The tension in the apartment was a physical presence, choking the air. Every time she smiled at her phone, a fresh wave of nausea would roll over me. Every time she mentioned Julian's name, even innocently, it felt like a deliberate jab. One evening after dinner, I gathered my courage. She was on the couch, scrolling through something on her tablet. The rain was still falling outside. It felt like we were trapped in a damp, silent box. "Clara," I started, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Can we talk? Properly?" She sighed, a small, impatient sound that grated on my nerves. She put the tablet down, but her fingers lingered near it. "About this again, Alex? I thought we talked." "We talked," I conceded, "but I don't think you heard me, or maybe you just didn't want to." "I heard you," she said, her tone defensive already. "You're uncomfortable. You're scared. I get it. It's a big change." "It's not just a big change," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It's asking me to agree to something that fundamentally alters what our marriage is, what I thought our marriage was. It feels like a betrayal, Clara, that you've developed these feelings, that you want to act on them, and that your solution is to dismantle what we have instead of, I don't know, working through the feelings within the marriage. She shifted on the couch, avoiding my gaze. "I told you, I do think this is a way to work through them, by exploring them. Repressing them isn't healthy. Exploring them with another man isn't working through them within the marriage," I countered, the logic feeling painfully obvious to me. That's choosing to pursue something outside of it, and you're asking me to give you permission." It's not about choosing him over you, she insisted, though her words rang hollow. It's about adding something. Expanding. Expanding. I scoffed, unable to help myself. The word felt absurd, clinical. You want to expand our marriage by bringing Julian into it? What about my feelings, my boundaries, my comfort? That's where the insecurity comes in, Alex, she said, her voice rising. You're letting your fear control you. You're so focused on what you might lose, you can't see what we could gain. Julian is he's so full of life, Alex. He reminds me of the person I was before things got so routine. Routine. The word hung in the air like a judgment. Our life, the life we'd built together, was just routine. And Julian, the charismatic marketing guy, was the antidote. It wasn't just the potential infidelity that hurt. It was the implication that we were not enough, were dull, were stifling her. This was the what-if made real. She wasn't just attracted to him. She saw him as a key to a lost part of herself, and our marriage was the cage. Routine? I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Is that what you think of our life? Our 10 years together? Routine? That's not fair, she said, though she still wouldn't look me in the eye. I didn't mean it like that. I just mean sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions. Julian, he has this spark, this energy. And you need to get that energy from him. I asked, my voice tight. You can't find that spark here with me? She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. I don't know, Alex. That was it. I don't know. The most devastating answer she could have given. It confirmed everything. The doubt, the distance, the fact that she was already halfway out the door, emotionally. Okay, I said, the numbness returning, stronger this time. I think we're done talking about this for tonight. I got up and walked away, leaving her on the couch. The apartment felt colder, the rain outside louder. I went into the bedroom, the room we shared, the room that now felt vast and empty when she wasn't truly present in it. I looked at her side of the bed, at the pillows, the blanket, and felt a profound sense of loss. The loss of the future I thought we had, the loss of the person I thought she was, the loss of the easy comfort of our shared life. The next few days were worse. The air between us was thick with unspoken resentment and hurt. She didn't mention Julian or opening the marriage again directly, but the topic hung over us like a storm cloud that refused to break. Her phone was still a constant companion. She was distant, preoccupied. I felt like I was living with a ghost, or perhaps, more accurately, living with someone who was already living another life, even if only in her head. I tried to go through the motions, work, errands, cooking dinner, but it all felt meaningless. The foundation had crumbled, and I was just standing on the rubble, unsure where to step next. I reread my old texts from her, looking for clues, for signs I'd missed, for reassurance that the woman who wrote them was still there somewhere. You're my perfect match. So glad I found you. Can't wait to grow old with you. The words felt hollow now, mocking me from the screen. I talked to Ben again. He listened, offered sympathy, but ultimately he couldn't fix it. He could only remind me that my feelings were valid and that I had the right to choose not to live in a way that caused me this much pain. You can't force her to want what you want, he said gently. And you can't force yourself to be okay with something you're fundamentally not okay with, especially when it's presented like this. He was right. I couldn't live like this, waiting for her to decide if the life we had was worth more than the spark Julian offered. I couldn't live with the constant tension, the feeling of being second best, the knowledge that my wife desired someone else and saw our marriage as a barrier to her happiness or self-discovery. The self-discovery angle continued to gnaw at me. Was she genuinely confused, grappling with a midlife identity crisis and seeing Julian as some kind of guru? Or was it a calculated way to make her desire for another man sound less selfish, less like a betrayal? Was she gaslighting me, using my known insecurity to invalidate my very real pain? Ben thought it was probably a bit of both. Maybe she genuinely felt stifled, but her method of addressing it was deeply flawed and hurtful. And weaponizing my insecurity was a clear manipulation tactic. I started spending more time out of the apartment, long walks in Discovery Park, watching the ships on the Sound, the cold, damp air a small comfort against the heat of my internal turmoil. I needed space to think, to breathe, away from the oppressive silence of our home. The city, usually a source of energy, felt indifferent to my pain. People hurried past, living their lives, their problems seemingly mundane compared to the seismic shift in mine. I thought about the 10 years, the memories, the inside jokes, the challenges we'd overcome together. Had it all been a lie? Or had something fundamental changed in her, something I hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to see? Did Julian just happen to be the catalyst, or was he the specific object that made her realize she wanted something different, someone different? It felt like mourning. Mourning a relationship that was technically still alive, but felt dead to me. The trust was gone. How could I ever look at her the same way, knowing she desired someone else so intensely she was willing to shatter our reality for it? How could I ever feel secure, knowing that if someone else came along who offered a different kind of spark, she might decide she needed to explore that too? The idea of an open marriage presented as a solution felt like a perverse joke. It wasn't a mutual exploration of alternative relationship structures. It was a demand born of external attraction, designed to give her permission to pursue that attraction while keeping me on the hook, presumably for comfort and stability. It was the opposite of partnership. It was unilateral, dismissive, and deeply hurtful. I realized with a heavy heart that I couldn't stay in this limbo. I couldn't pretend that things could go back to normal, or that we could somehow build a stronger marriage on this shattered foundation. My boundary was clear. I did not want an open marriage, especially not initiated under these circumstances, for this reason. Her boundary seemed equally clear. She wanted to explore this connection with Julian, and if I wouldn't facilitate it within the marriage structure she was proposing, then what? The thought of losing her was terrifying. 10 years is a long time. She was woven into the fabric of my life. Our friends were mutual friends. Our routines were intertwined. Our future plans were built together. The idea of dismantling all of that felt overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a cliff. But the thought of staying felt worse. Staying and agreeing to her terms would be a slow death for my self-respect, a constant source of pain and resentment. Watching her explore a connection with another man, knowing it stemmed from a perceived lack in our life together, would break me. Living with the person who had so easily dismissed my feelings and used my insecurity against me would erode who I was. The rain continued, a relentless soundtrack to my despair. I sat in the quiet apartment after she'd gone to bed, the only light coming from the streetlights outside. I looked around at the familiar objects, the bookshelf filled with books we'd read, the photos on the wall, the worn armchair where we'd spent countless hours. None of it felt like mine anymore. It felt like hers, or maybe like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I knew what I had to do. It was the hardest decision I'd ever faced. But there was no other path that didn't involve sacrificing my fundamental needs and values. I couldn't protect the marriage as it was, not when she was pushing to change its core definition so drastically and dismissively. All I could protect was myself. The climax wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, firm resolution that had solidified inside me over weeks of agony. I waited until the weekend, until we were both home and there were no immediate distractions. The air in the apartment was heavier than usual, humid from the rain. She was in the living room reading. I walked in and sat down opposite her, taking a deep breath. "Clara," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk, and this time I need you to really listen, without interrupting, without getting defensive." She looked up, her expression wary, but she nodded slowly. "I've done a lot of thinking since you told me," I began. "About Julian, about opening the marriage, about us. And I've realized that I can't do it." I held up a hand when she started to speak. "Please, just listen. I understand that you've developed feelings for Julian. I understand that you feel like he represents something you want to explore. You've talked about self-discovery, about finding a spark." I paused, looking her directly in the eye. "But the way you've gone about this, the way you've dropped this on me, the demand to open the marriage specifically for him, the way you've dismissed my pain and my boundaries, even using my insecurity against me, it's broken something, Clara." My voice cracked slightly, but I kept going. "It's broken my trust. It's made me feel like our 10 years, our commitment, our monogamous agreement, means nothing to you when faced with an external attraction. It's made me feel like I'm not enough, not because of my hairline, but because the life we built isn't enough for you anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "I cannot, in good conscience, agree to open our marriage under these circumstances," I stated, my voice firm now. "It would be a betrayal of myself, of my values, and frankly of the marriage I thought we had. It's not about being afraid or insecure. It's about having a fundamental boundary about what marriage means to me, and ours for me was always meant to be a partnership built on exclusive commitment." I took another breath. This was the hardest part. Your desire to explore things with Julian, and your willingness to ask me to dismantle our marriage for it, tells me that we want fundamentally different things. Or maybe that you want something I can't give you, not without sacrificing who I am. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it guilt? Sadness? I couldn't be sure. But her expression remained largely closed off, defensive. "So," I continued, my voice quiet now, filled with a profound sadness, "since you are unwilling to back down from wanting to explore this with Julian, and I am unwilling to compromise my core needs and boundaries, I don't see a way forward for us, not together in the marriage we had." This was the point of no return. The words hung in the air, final and devastating. Clara finally spoke, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and something that might have been hurt, though it was directed at me. "So that's it? You're just giving up? Because I want something different?" "Giving up?" I echoed, the phrase stinging. "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing not to live in a way that is causing me immense pain and compromising my values. I'm choosing not to pretend that things are okay when the foundation has been shattered. You're the one who introduced the idea of dismantling our marriage, Clara. You're the one who brought Julian into our equation." "I just wanted to be honest," she retorted, her voice rising. "I wanted to explore something that felt important." "Honesty without empathy is cruelty," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "And exploring something that feels important shouldn't come at the cost of your partner's well-being and the destruction of the life you built together. You could have explored that spark in other ways. You chose Julian. You chose to ask me to step aside." Her face flushed. "That's not fair, Alex. You're making me out to be some kind of villain." "I'm telling you how your actions have made me feel," I corrected. "Like my feelings don't matter. Like our commitment is conditional. Like I'm just an obstacle to your happiness with someone else." We sat in silence again, the chasm between us wider than ever. The rain outside seemed to pick up pace, drumming a frantic beat against the windows. The air in the apartment felt heavy, charged with unresolved emotions. Finally, she looked away, towards the window. Her shoulders slumped slightly. When she spoke, her voice was low, devoid of its earlier defensiveness, replaced by a chilling resignation. "So, what happens now?" The question hung in the air. What happened now? The answer was painful but clear. "Now," I said, my voice thick with sorrow, "we figure out how to separate." There was no dramatic outburst, no tears, not from her anyway, just that quiet, devastating acceptance. It was almost worse than the anger. It felt like confirmation that she had already emotionally detached, that the idea of losing me wasn't as devastating as the idea of not exploring things with him. "Okay," she said, her voice flat. "Okay." We talked logistics then in a surreal, detached way. Who would stay in the apartment temporarily? How would we handle finances? It felt like discussing a business merger rather than the end of a decade-long marriage. Julian's name wasn't mentioned again, but his presence filled the room, the silent architect of our downfall. Later that evening, after the stilted conversation had ended and she'd retreated to the bedroom, I started packing a bag. Just the essentials. I couldn't stay here tonight. Not in this space that felt so utterly broken. I called Ben again, my voice shaking. "I did it," I told him. "I told her I can't do it, and we're separating." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry. How are you doing?" "Numb," I admitted. "Just numb and sad. So incredibly sad." "Come stay here tonight," he said immediately. "Don't stay there. Just come over. We'll figure things out." I agreed. Packing felt like dismantling a part of myself. Each item I put in the bag felt heavy with memory. The worn T-shirt she loved, the book I was reading, The photo of us hiking Rattlesnake Ledge last fall, smiling, unaware of the storm brewing. The rain had eased by the time I left the apartment. The city streets were slick and gleaming under the streetlights. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet pavement and blooming jasmine from someone's window box. I looked back at the building, at the window of our apartment, dark now. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a tombstone for the life I had. Arriving at Ben's place felt like entering a different world. His apartment was smaller, messier, filled with his familiar clutter and the smell of whatever he'd cooked for dinner. It was grounded, real, blessedly free of the suffocating tension that had become my reality. Ben didn't push me to talk more than I wanted to. He just made me a cup of tea, showed me where the guest towels were, and sat with me in comfortable silence for a while. His simple presence was a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. The next few days were a blur of practicalities, finding a temporary place to stay, a sublet in Capitol Hill, notifying work, briefly, vaguely, starting the painful process of dividing 10 years of accumulated life. Clara remained detached, almost clinical, during these discussions. It was like she had flipped a switch, moving on to the next phase with chilling efficiency. It hurt, but it also reinforced that I had made the right decision. The person I loved, the person who had been my anchor, was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who prioritized her own desires over the partnership we'd built. I learned indirectly that she had indeed started seeing Julian almost immediately after our conversation. It wasn't a surprise, but hearing it still sent a fresh wave of pain through me. The speed of it felt like another dismissal, another sign of how little our marriage and my feelings had weighed against her desire for him. The self-discovery narrative felt even thinner now, exposed as a convenient justification for pursuing an attraction. The sublet was small and impersonal, a temporary box to exist in. It had a view of the city, the same skyline I used to look at from our apartment, but it felt different now. Distant, uninvolved. The rain continued its rhythmic presence, a constant reminder of the emotional climate I was living in. I spent evenings alone, scrolling through old photos on my phone, a form of self-torture. Photos of Clara and me, smiling, happy, on hikes, at parties, just lounging at home. We looked so comfortable together, so right. How had we gotten from there to here? How had the woman in those photos become the woman who could so easily discard our shared life? The insecurity she'd weaponized still lingered, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. Was I boring? Had I failed to provide her with the spark she needed? Was that why she sought it elsewhere? Ben helped counter these thoughts. He reminded me that a healthy relationship isn't about one person being a constant source of excitement for the other. It's about mutual support, shared experiences, and commitment. Her dissatisfaction, he argued, was hers to own and address, not mine to fix by sacrificing my boundaries. The legal process of separation and eventually divorce began. It was as emotionally draining as the initial confrontation. Lawyers, paperwork, dividing assets, the clinical dismantling of a life built on love and shared dreams. Every piece of furniture, every shared possession, felt like a painful reminder of what was lost. Clara remained polite but distant throughout. There were no emotional outbursts, no tearful apologies, no attempts at reconciliation. It was clear she had made her choice and was moving forward. With Julian, presumably. The thought still stung, a sharp, specific pain that cut through the general ache of loss. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Work was a distraction, a place where I could immerse myself in logic and problems that had clear solutions, unlike my life. I spent more time with Ben and reconnected with other friends I hadn't seen as often while wrapped up in my marital bubble. Their support was invaluable, a reminder that my world hadn't completely imploded, that there were still connections, still life outside the wreckage of my marriage. The initial shock and numbness began to fade, replaced by waves of grief and anger. Anger at Clara for her selfishness, for her lack of empathy, for the way she had shattered my trust. Grief for the loss of the future I had envisioned, the comfortable, predictable life I had cherished. I thought about the self-discovery she had spoken of. Was she finding it with Julian? Was she happier? The questions were a form of torture, but I couldn't help asking them. Part of me hoped she was, in a twisted way. If all this pain, all this destruction, had at least led to her genuine happiness, maybe it wasn't entirely meaningless. But another part, the hurt part, wanted her to realize the immense cost of her choices, wanted her to feel the weight of what she had lost. The process of divorce is slow and deliberate. It gives you too much time to think, to replay, to second-guess. There were moments of doubt, moments where the sheer loneliness of my new reality felt overwhelming, and I wondered if I should have compromised, if staying in a painful, open marriage was better than being alone. But those moments were fleeting. I would remember the look in her eyes when she used my insecurity against me, the chilling resignation when I said we had to separate, and I knew I had made the only choice I could live with. I started seeing a therapist. It helped. Talking through the betrayal, the grief, the challenge to my self-worth. She helped me see that Clara's actions were hers, born of her own unmet needs or flaws, and not a reflection of my inherent worthiness as a partner. She helped me process the anger and the sadness, and begin to build a new sense of self, one that wasn't defined by my relationship status or someone else's desire. The PNW continued its rhythm of rain and occasional sunbreaks. I found a new apartment, smaller than the one with Clara, but entirely mine. It felt like a blank slate, a space to build something new, something different. I decorated it simply, deliberately choosing things that felt like me, not us. Months passed. The divorce was finalized. It felt anticlimactic, just paperwork confirming what had already happened emotionally months ago. I hadn't seen Clara since the initial separation discussions. We communicated only through lawyers or brief impersonal texts about logistics. Julian's name was never mentioned between us again. My life began to settle into a new routine. Work, friends, therapy, exploring the city on my own terms. The ache of loss was still there, a dull throb, but it no longer consumed me. The sharp edges of the betrayal began to soften with time and distance. I still thought about her, of course. 10 years don't just disappear. But the thoughts were less painful, more like memories of a past life. I sometimes wondered about her, about Julian, about whether she had found the spark and self-discovery she was seeking. I didn't actively try to find out. My life was moving forward, and dwelling on her new reality felt like looking backward. One day, several months after the divorce was final, Ben mentioned he'd seen Clara. He was deliberately vague, just saying she seemed fine. He didn't mention Julian, and I didn't ask. A part of me was curious, but a larger part was protective of the fragile peace I had found. The journey wasn't over. Healing is a process, not a destination. There were still days when the sadness would hit unexpectedly, triggered by a song, a place, a shared memory. But those days were fewer and farther between. More often I felt a quiet sense of relief. Relief at being free from the tension, the uncertainty, the pain of living with someone who didn't fully choose me. Relief at having stood up for myself, at having prioritized my own well-being when faced with an impossible choice. The rain outside my new apartment window is falling now, a familiar sound in this city. It no longer sounds like accusation. It just sounds like rain. It's a reminder of where I've been, but also of the resilience I found. I lost a marriage, yes, but I didn't lose myself. I didn't compromise my values or accept a situation that would have broken me. I chose a painful ending over a slow, agonizing continuation. And in that choice, I found a different kind of strength, a different kind of peace. The future is uncertain, but it's mine to build on my own terms, and that feels like a kind of freedom I didn't know I was missing. Life settled into a steady rhythm. Work was demanding, which was good. It occupied my mind, giving me complex problems to solve that didn't involve untangling emotional knots. My team was solid, focused. My boss, a pragmatic woman named Sarah, noticed I was quieter than usual for a while, but didn't pry. She just made sure I had the resources I needed and wasn't overloaded. I appreciated the quiet support. Ben remained a constant. We'd meet for coffee, sometimes just sit in silence, sometimes talk for hours about everything and nothing. He was a steady, grounding presence. He never said, "I told you so," even though, in a way, he had validated my feelings from the start. He just helped me navigate the choppy waters, reminding me that it was okay to feel hurt, angry, sad, and confused, sometimes all at once. I also started reconnecting with other friends. It was awkward at first. Explaining the divorce felt like reciting a painful script. Some friends were shocked, having seen us as a stable couple. Others had perhaps sensed the underlying tension I hadn't fully acknowledged myself. Most were supportive, offering dinners, drinks, or just a listening ear. One evening, I was talking to my friend Lisa, who works in a different industry but is generally very aware of social trends. I told her about Clara framing her desire for Julian as self-discovery and needing to explore parts of herself she felt were stifled. Lisa nodded slowly. Yeah, that narrative is pretty common right now, especially in certain circles. This idea that if you're not constantly pursuing some kind of growth or authenticity, you're stagnating, and sometimes people interpret that as needing to break fundamental boundaries or blow up their existing structures. But why does it have to involve another person? I asked, the frustration still bubbling up. Why Julian? Why couldn't she find that spark by, I don't know, taking up rock climbing or learning a new language? Sometimes the spark isn't just about a new activity, Lisa said gently. It's about feeling seen or desired in a new way, or seeing someone who embodies qualities you admire or feel you lack. Julian probably represents something she feels is missing in her life, or maybe something she feels she suppressed to fit into the wife box. It doesn't excuse how she handled it, Alex, not at all. It sounds incredibly painful and selfish, but the self-discovery thing, as misguided as it was in application, might have been her attempt to articulate a deeper dissatisfaction she didn't know how else to express. It was a more charitable interpretation than I was capable of at the time, but it resonated slightly. It didn't make her actions less hurtful, but it perhaps added a layer of complexity to her character that went beyond just being selfishly attracted to a hot guy. Maybe she was genuinely wrestling with something internal, and Julian just became the focal point, the perceived solution. It was still devastating, but maybe not purely malicious. I started exploring the city more actively on my own. Visiting museums I'd always meant to go to, trying out new restaurants, wandering through different neighborhoods. It was a way to reclaim my space, my city, from the shared history with Clara. The PNW landscape, too, offered solace. I started hiking again, sometimes with Ben, sometimes alone. The physical exertion, the quiet of the trails, the vastness of the mountains and forests, it helped clear my head, put things in perspective. The rain in the mountains felt cleansing, washing away some of the lingering bitterness. One particularly rainy Saturday, I was hiking a familiar trail near Snoqualmie Pass. The mist hung low, clinging to the trees, creating a moody, introspective atmosphere. I reached a viewpoint overlooking a valley, the view partially obscured by the fog. It felt symbolic. My future was still hazy, uncertain, but there was a landscape underneath waiting to be revealed. I sat on a damp rock, listening to the sound of the rain on the leaves, the distant rush of a waterfall. I thought about Clara, about Julian, about the end of my marriage. The sharp pain had dulled, replaced by a melancholy ache. I didn't hate her anymore, not with the same intensity. The anger had subsided, leaving behind a quiet sadness for what was lost. I thought about her apology for using my hairline against me. Oh wait, she hadn't apologized. She hadn't apologized for that, or for the way she'd proposed dismantling our life, or for the pain she'd caused. The clinical efficiency of the separation, the lack of emotional reckoning on her part, had been striking. It spoke volumes. It reinforced that her focus was entirely on her own path, her own perceived needs, with little regard for the wreckage left behind. That lack of apology, that lack of apparent remorse for the way she handled things, was perhaps the final piece of confirmation I needed that the marriage was truly over, not just physically, but emotionally. There was no bridge to build, no common ground to find, because she didn't seem to recognize the depth of the wound she had inflicted. The self-discovery seemed to have bypassed any discovery of empathy or responsibility. The thought was clarifying, if still painful. It cemented my decision as the right one. I couldn't have stayed. I couldn't have healed in that environment, constantly exposed to the source of my pain and the reminder that I wasn't enough. As the weeks turned into months, the new apartment started to feel more like home. I put up art, bought plants, arranged my books and belongings in a way that felt comfortable and authentic to me. It was a small act of rebuilding, creating a space that was entirely mine, where I felt safe and grounded. I started dating again, tentatively. It was strange at first. navigating the world of dating apps and first dates after being off the market for over a decade. It was a reminder of how much things had changed both in the dating landscape and in me. I was more cautious, more guarded. The experience with Clara had left scars, making it harder to trust, harder to open up. But I also knew myself better. I knew what I valued in a partner: honesty, empathy, commitment, a shared vision of the future. I wasn't looking for a spark or someone to fill a void or embody a lost part of myself. I was looking for a partner, someone to build a life with, based on mutual respect and shared values. Most first dates didn't go anywhere. People were nice enough, but there wasn't a click, a sense of connection. And that was okay. I wasn't in a rush. I was focused on continuing to heal, on building my own life, on finding my own sense of fulfillment that didn't depend on another person. Ben continued to check in. He was genuinely happy to see me finding my feet again. We even planned a longer hiking trip for the summer, a backpacking trip in the Olympic Peninsula. The idea of spending a few days off the grid surrounded by nature felt incredibly appealing. A chance to disconnect from the noise, both external and internal, and just be. I occasionally heard snippets about Clara through the grapevine of mutual friends, though I tried to keep my distance from that. She was still with Julian, apparently. They seemed happy, successful. The details were always vague, filtered through other people's perceptions. I tried not to dwell on it. Their story was their story. Mine was mine. The pain of the divorce, the betrayal, the loss, it wasn't something I would ever completely forget. It was a part of my history now, a chapter in my life story. But it no longer defined me. It had changed me, certainly, made me more wary perhaps, but also stronger, more resilient, more aware of the importance of clear boundaries and true partnership. I thought about the what if. What if Clara's attraction to Julian really was about a deeper dissatisfaction, a feeling of being stifled? Even if that were true, her approach was still devastatingly wrong. A healthy relationship requires partners to communicate those feelings, to work together to find solutions, to support each other's growth without destroying the foundation of the relationship. Her choice to pursue an external solution and to demand I facilitate it was the core betrayal. It wasn't about whether she felt stifled, it was about how she chose to address it and the disregard she showed for my feelings in the process. That clarity was empowering. It removed the lingering self-doubt. It wasn't my fault she felt that way. It wasn't my responsibility to fix her perceived lack of spark by sacrificing my own needs. My only responsibility was to myself, to protect my own well-being and integrity. The apartment was quiet tonight. The rain had stopped. A sliver of moon was visible through the clouds. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. It felt peaceful. Not the forced peace of numbness, but a genuine calm that had settled over me. I still had bad days, moments of unexpected sadness or loneliness, but they were balanced by good days, days filled with work that felt meaningful, time spent with friends who cared, moments of quiet contentment. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer felt daunting. It felt like an open road, a path I was walking on my own terms towards whatever came next. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The scent of the city, clean after the rain, filled my lungs. I had survived. I had rebuilt. I was okay. More than okay, even. I was finding my own spark, not in another person, but within myself. And that felt like the most important discovery of all. The memory of Clara, of Julian, of the shattered marriage, felt distant now, like a story I had read, not a life I had lived. It was a reminder of the storms I had weathered, but also of the strength I had found in navigating them alone. The rain might return tomorrow, but I knew I could handle it. I could handle whatever came. I had my boundaries, my self-respect, and a quiet determination to keep moving forward. And that was enough. Current part characters, 3999. Total characters, 1982. Winter in the Pacific Northwest can feel endless. The days are short, the sky is often a uniform grey, and the rain seems like a permanent fixture. But even in the darkest months, there are moments of unexpected beauty, a sudden shaft of sunlight breaking through the clouds, illuminating the wet leaves and making the city gleam, or the crisp, cold air after a storm. My healing felt a bit like that, mostly grey and heavy, but with occasional bursts of light and clarity. I continued therapy, which was incredibly helpful. We delved into my tendency to internalize blame, my fear of confrontation, and how the experience with Clara had exacerbated those vulnerabilities. Understanding the dynamics, recognizing the emotional manipulation, even if unintentional on her part, helped me process the trauma and rebuild my self-esteem. It wasn't just about getting over the divorce, it was about understanding myself better and learning how to protect my emotional boundaries in future relationships. My job provided a good anchor. I was working on a challenging project that required a lot of focus, which was a welcome distraction. My colleagues were supportive, though most didn't know the full extent of what I'd gone through. I kept my personal life relatively private at work, preferring to process things with Ben and my therapist. Spring eventually arrived, bringing longer days and tentative bursts of sunshine. The city seemed to shake off its winter gloom. People were out and about more, parks filled with runners and picnickers, outdoor cafes buzzed with activity. It felt like a metaphor for my own life, slowly emerging from a period of darkness and finding renewed energy. Ben and I went on our backpacking trip to the Olympic Peninsula. It was exactly what I needed. Days spent hiking through ancient forests, the air thick with the scent of cedar and damp earth. Nights camping under a sky full of stars, far away from city lights and the reminders of my past life. There was a simplicity to it, just walking, eating, sleeping, surrounded by nature. It was grounding, a chance to reconnect with something real and enduring. We talked, of course, but there were also long stretches of comfortable silence, just enjoying the peace. Ben was a great companion, easygoing and supportive. During the trip, sitting by a campfire one evening, I talked about the lingering question of Clara's self-discovery. I still wrestled with it sometimes. Had I genuinely stifled her? Was there something fundamentally wrong with me, or with the life we had built that made her seek fulfillment elsewhere? Ben listened, tossing a small stick into the fire. "Alex," he said, his voice quiet, "you built a life together. It sounds like it was a good life, a stable one. Was it perfect? Probably not. No life is. But a partner who feels like they're stifled is responsible for communicating that, for working with their partner to find solutions, whether that's changing routines, pursuing new interests together or separately, or going to therapy as a couple. They don't get to just blame the other person or the relationship structure and then demand unilateral changes to pursue someone else." He looked at me, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Her feelings, whatever they were hers. Her decision to act on them the way she did and to treat you the way she did was her choice. It doesn't reflect on your worth as a partner, Alex. It reflects on her inability or unwillingness to handle her own stuff in a healthy, respectful way within the context of a committed relationship. His words were powerful because they weren't just sympathetic. They were logical. They dismantled the lingering self-blame. It wasn't about whether I was boring or stifling. It was about her internal state and her choices. And her choices were ultimately destructive to the partnership. That conversation was another turning point. It helped release the last vestiges of guilt and self-doubt related to her self-discovery narrative. I could accept that maybe she was genuinely struggling with feelings of dissatisfaction or a desire for something different, without accepting that her actions were justified or that I was to blame. Dating continued, still mostly unsuccessful but less daunting. I met a few interesting people, had some pleasant conversations, but nothing serious developed. And that was okay. I wasn't looking for a replacement for Clara or for someone to complete me. I was looking for a connection, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. And I knew that finding that would take time, and might not happen at all. But I was content with my life as it was. I had my work, my friends, my own space, and a growing sense of peace. I stopped actively avoiding places Clara might be, though Seattle isn't small and our paths didn't seem to cross naturally. The mutual friends' grapevine still existed, but I paid less attention to it. What she was doing, who she was with, it felt less relevant to my life now. One afternoon, walking through a neighborhood near my old apartment, I saw her. She was coming out of a coffee shop, laughing at something Julian, who was walking beside her, had said. They looked like a couple, comfortable together. She looked happy. My heart gave a strange lurch. Not pain exactly, but a weird, detached pang. It was the first time I'd seen them together, the tangible reality of the catalyst that had blown up my life. Julian was exactly as I'd pictured him, tall, confident, easy charm. I ducked into a doorway instinctively, not wanting to be seen. I watched them walk away, disappearing into the crowd. It was a strange moment. There was no crushing pain, no surge of anger, just observation. They looked happy. The self-discovery seemed to be going well, and it had cost me my marriage, my home, a significant chunk of my life. Walking away from the doorway, back towards my own neighborhood, I felt a mix of residual sadness and a quiet sense of vindication. Her happiness, if it was genuine, had come at a high price, paid mostly by me, but I had survived that price. I had rebuilt my life, and I was finding my own path, one that didn't require shattering someone else's world. The encounter was a reminder of the past, but it didn't derail me. It was like looking at an old scar. It's a part of you, a reminder of an injury, but it doesn't hurt anymore. Summer arrived in full force, bringing glorious sunshine and long warm evenings. The city was buzzing with energy. I felt it too, a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. I was still single, still navigating the complexities of post-divorce life, but I wasn't defined by it. I thought about the person I was a year ago, sitting on that couch, frozen by shock and betrayal. I was a different person now. Stronger, more resilient, more self-aware. The pain had been immense, but it had also been transformative. It had forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, to rely on myself, to build a life that was truly mine. There was no dramatic conclusion to my story, no sudden moment of perfect happiness or final reckoning, just the quiet continuation of life. Healing is a process, and it takes time. But I was on the right path. I had faced the storm, survived it, and was now navigating calmer waters. The future remained open, full of possibilities. Maybe I would meet someone, maybe I wouldn't. Maybe my career would take a new turn, maybe it wouldn't. What mattered was that I was facing it with a sense of peace and self-acceptance I hadn't had before. The self-discovery Clara sought externally, I was finding internally, through navigating the wreckage she left behind. The rain, when it returned, was just rain, a part of the landscape, not a reflection of my internal state. I had found my footing. I was home, in my own skin, in my own life. And that felt like the most profound kind of peace I could have hoped for. The end of my marriage was a tragedy, but it was also the beginning of something new, something quieter, stronger, and entirely my own. The process of healing wasn't linear. There were still days when the sadness would wash over me, unexpectedly triggered by a song, a place, or just a quiet evening alone. But the duration and intensity of these waves lessened over time. I learned to ride them out, to acknowledge the pain without letting it consume me. Therapy was a crucial part of this, providing me with tools to manage my emotions and challenge negative thought patterns. I continued to build my life outside of the context of the marriage. My apartment became truly my own, reflecting my tastes and personality. I joined a hiking group, expanding my social circle beyond my existing friends. It was a small step, but it felt significant. Actively creating new connections and experiences that had nothing to do with my past life. My relationship with Ben deepened. He had seen me at my lowest point and had been a steady source of support. Our conversations were easy and honest, covering everything from work frustrations to dating disasters to philosophical ponderings on life's uncertainties. He was the kind of friend everyone needs, a reminder of loyalty and unwavering support. Dating remained challenging. The apps were a strange landscape to navigate, filled with curated profiles and brief, often superficial interactions. I went on a few more dates, some pleasant, some awkward, none leading to a lasting connection. I realized that the experience with Clara had made me more discerning, perhaps even a little wary. I wasn't interested in casual encounters or relationships that lacked depth or genuine commitment potential. I knew what I wanted, and I wasn't willing to settle. This newfound clarity was a positive outcome of the pain I'd endured. It had stripped away some of the naive assumptions I'd held about relationships and forced me to define my own needs and boundaries. I still thought about Clara and Julian sometimes, but the thoughts were less frequent and less emotionally charged. The initial shock and hurt had been replaced by a kind of detached curiosity, like observing characters in a story that no longer directly involved me. I heard through the grapevine that Julian had moved into what used to be our apartment. That stung a little, a sharp, specific reminder of the physical space that had been our home, now occupied by the man who had been the catalyst for its dissolution. But even that pain was manageable, a temporary pang rather than a crippling blow. I focused on my own journey. I took on more challenging projects at work, pushing myself professionally. I planned a solo trip, something I hadn't done before, to explore a part of the country I'd always wanted to see. These were acts of self-reliance, proving to myself that I was capable, independent, and could find fulfillment outside of a partnership. The concept of self-discovery that Clara had used as her justification continued to resonate, but in a different way. I realized that I was undergoing a profound process of self-discovery, not by pursuing an external attraction or dismantling a relationship, but by navigating loss, rebuilding my life, and understanding my own resilience. My self-discovery was born of necessity and pain, but it felt more authentic, more earned than the version she had described. I thought about the vulnerability she had exposed by confessing her feelings and proposing the open marriage. It must have taken some courage in a twisted way to be that honest, even if the honesty was delivered with such disregard for my feelings. But courage without responsibility, without empathy, is just recklessness. Her actions had been reckless with my heart, with our shared life. The PNW landscape continued to be a source of solace. Hiking in the mountains, walking along the coast, the raw beauty of nature provided perspective. My problems felt smaller against the backdrop of ancient trees and vast oceans. It was a reminder that life was bigger than my personal drama, that there was beauty and resilience in the world and in myself. I occasionally saw mutual friends who were still in touch with Clara. They would give brief, neutral updates. She seemed busy, still at the same company, still with Julian. There was never any mention of her regretting how things had unfolded or expressing concern for me. This continued lack of acknowledgement of the pain she had caused was, in its own way, a form of closure. It confirmed that she was either incapable or unwilling to confront the impact of her choices, and that any hope for a reconciliation or even a genuine apology was futile. It allowed me to fully let go of that possibility and focus entirely on my own future. My therapist suggested writing down my feelings, perhaps even writing a letter to Clara that I wouldn't send. I tried it. Pouring out the anger, the hurt, the confusion onto the page was cathartic. I wrote about the 10 years, the promises, the way she had used my insecurity against me, the coldness of the separation. I wrote about Julian, the anonymous figure who had become the symbol of my loss. I wrote about the pain of rebuilding, the loneliness, the fear, and I wrote about the strength I had found, the resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I never sent the letter. The act of writing it was enough. It allowed me to articulate the unspoken words, to give voice to the pain, and then to let it go. As the second year post-divorce began, the wounds had significantly healed. The scar was still there, a faint outline of where the break occurred, but it no longer ached constantly. I was living my life fully, pursuing my interests, nurturing my friendships, and building a future that felt right for me. I was still single, but it didn't feel like a lack. It felt like a choice. A period of focusing on myself, on solidifying my own foundation before inviting someone else into my life. When I did date, I was more discerning, more upfront about what I was looking for, and quicker to recognize red flags. The experience with Clara had been a painful lesson, but it had taught me invaluable things about boundaries, self-worth, and the true meaning of partnership. One evening, sitting in my apartment, looking out at the city lights reflected on the wet streets, I realized something profound. Clara had sought a spark and self-discovery by looking outside our marriage, by pursuing an external person who she felt embodied qualities she lacked. She had framed it as growth, as needing something more. But in doing so, she had destroyed the stable, loving partnership she already had. She had chased a fleeting feeling, projected onto another person, and sacrificed a decade of shared life and commitment. My own journey of self-discovery had been the opposite. It had come from within, forged in the crucible of pain and loss. It wasn't about finding someone else or breaking boundaries. It was about finding my own strength, My own resilience, my own worth, independent of a relationship. It was about rebuilding, not dismantling. And that felt like a much more genuine, much more sustainable form of growth. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe I would meet someone wonderful. Maybe I would remain single and find fulfillment in other ways. The uncertainty no longer scared me, it felt like possibility. I had faced one of the biggest challenges of my life and had come through it, bruised but not broken. I had lost a marriage, but I had found myself. And that was a victory, quiet and personal, but deeply significant. The rain began again, a soft, familiar sound. I smiled. It was just rain, and I was okay. Life continued its steady pace. Work remained engaging, providing intellectual challenge and a sense of accomplishment. I was promoted, a recognition of my hard work and focus over the past couple of years. It felt good to be acknowledged, to see tangible results of my efforts. It was another piece of building my new life, separate from the old one. My hiking group became a solid source of camaraderie. We planned weekend trips, pushing ourselves physically and enjoying the stunning natural beauty of the PNW. There was a simple honesty in these interactions, shared effort, mutual encouragement, conversations about trails and gear and the weather. It was a refreshing contrast to the emotional complexities of my past. Dating was still dating. I had a few more encounters, some pleasant, some forgettable. I met a woman named Sarah, different Sarah from work, who I connected with on a deeper level. We had similar interests, a shared sense of humour, and, crucially, a similar understanding of the importance of open communication and mutual respect in a relationship. It was slow, tentative, built on friendship first, which felt right. There was no immediate, overwhelming spark like the one Clara described with Julian, but there was something quieter, steadier, and potentially more enduring, genuine connection and mutual regard. It was a stark contrast to the whirlwind Clara had described. Her irresistible attraction, her need to immediately explore it by dismantling her marriage. It felt like a chase for a feeling, an external validation, rather than a foundation for a lasting connection. What I was finding with Sarah was different. It was about shared values, intellectual compatibility, emotional safety, and a mutual desire to build something together, slowly and intentionally. Through the ever-present grapevine of mutual friends, which I still tried to keep at arm's length, but sometimes information just found its way to me, I heard more about Clara and Julian. Their spark, it seemed, hadn't magically solved all of life's complexities. There were whispers of tension, disagreements, the mundane realities of a relationship settling in after the initial excitement faded. Julian, it turned out, wasn't just a charismatic marketing genius. He also had his own set of issues, including, apparently, a tendency towards being controlling and a lack of interest in the kind of quiet domesticity that makes up the bulk of a long-term partnership. Hearing this wasn't a source of malicious glee, as the old, hurt part of me might have expected. It was more of a quiet, melancholic confirmation. The self-discovery she sought in him, the spark she chased, hadn't led to some utopian existence. It had led to a different set of challenges, perhaps ones she hadn't anticipated in her initial rush of attraction and perceived liberation. It reinforced the idea that chasing a feeling, especially at the cost of destroying a solid, if perhaps temporarily routine foundation, rarely leads to lasting happiness. True fulfillment, true growth, comes from within and from building healthy connections based on reality, not just projection and desire. I also heard that her relationship with some of her friends had become strained. The way she had handled the divorce, her apparent lack of remorse or empathy for me, had alienated some people who had been friends with both of us for years. It seemed her self-discovery had come with social consequences, a ripple effect of the choices she had made. I didn't dwell on these updates. My focus was on my own life, on the positive things I was building. My connection with Sarah was growing. We talked for hours, shared our histories, carefully, honestly, and enjoyed spending time together, whether it was hiking, trying new restaurants, or just reading quietly in the same room. It felt easy, natural, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. It was everything my marriage had lacked in its final months, everything I had realized I needed. My therapist helped me process the lingering feelings about Clara, not just the hurt, but also a sense of complex sadness for her, for the choices she made, and for the life she had walked away from. It wasn't pity exactly, but a recognition of the human capacity for self-sabotage and the often painful consequences of prioritizing fleeting desires over enduring connection and responsibility. One sunny afternoon, walking through a park near my apartment, I saw Clara again. She was sitting on a bench alone, looking out at the water. She looked tired, older than I remembered. There was no sign of Julian. I hesitated for a moment. Should I approach her? Say something? What would I even say? The urge passed quickly. There was nothing left to say. The story between us was over. We had both moved on, albeit on vastly different paths, forged from the same point of rupture. I walked on, giving her space, a quiet acknowledgement of the boundary that now existed between us. It wasn't hostility, just distance. The distance of two lives that had diverged completely. As I walked, I thought about the man I was when she dropped that bomb on me, shocked, confused, insecure, clinging to a reality that was already crumbling. And I thought about the man I was now, still carrying the scars, but stronger, clearer, more at peace. The pain had been immense, but it had been a catalyst for my own, more genuine self-discovery. The rain is falling again now, a gentle shower against the window. It's evening. I'm in my apartment, comfortable and quiet. Sarah might call later, or maybe I'll just read. The future isn't a terrifying unknown anymore, it's just life, with its ups and downs, its joys and challenges. I'm ready for it. I have my own spark now, one that doesn't rely on anyone else to ignite or maintain. It's mine, and that feels like everything. The story of my marriage, of Clara, of Julian is a closed book. A painful chapter, but one that ultimately led me to a place of greater strength and self-understanding. I lost a partner, but I gained myself. And in the quiet peace of this rainy evening in Seattle, that feels like a victory worth cherishing. The seasons turned. The long, grey winter gave way to the tentative green of spring, and then the glorious, sun-drenched days of a PNW summer. My relationship with Sarah continued to grow, slowly and steadily. It was a different kind of love than I had experienced with Clara. Less intense initial passion, perhaps, but built on a foundation of deep respect, shared values, and genuine friendship. We talked about everything, openly and honestly, including my past marriage and the pain of the divorce. Sarah listened with empathy and understanding, never judging, just offering support. It felt safe to be vulnerable with her, to share the parts of myself that were still healing. We went hiking together, exploring new trails in the mountains and along the coast. Being in nature with her felt natural and grounding. We cooked meals together in my apartment, the kitchen filling with laughter and conversation, not the tense silence that had marked the end of my time there with Clara. We talked about the future, not with the naive certainty I'd had with Clara, but with a quiet hope and a willingness to navigate whatever came our way, together. My own self-discovery continued. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, but a gradual process of understanding my own needs, my own strengths, and my own capacity for resilience. I learned that I was capable of being happy on my own, that my worth wasn't tied to being in a relationship, and that I could build a fulfilling life, regardless of my relationship status. This knowledge was empowering. It meant that any future relationship I entered would be a choice, an addition to an already complete life, not a desperate attempt to fill a void. I still heard occasional updates about Clara and Julian through the periphery of my social circle. The whispers of tension seemed to have grown louder. It sounded like the initial spark had well and truly faded, replaced by incompatibility and conflict. There was talk of them arguing frequently, of Julian being emotionally distant, of Clara feeling increasingly isolated. It seemed the external validation and perceived spark she had chased hadn't provided the lasting fulfillment she had hoped for. It wasn't a source of joy for me to hear this. There was no sense of karma or satisfaction in her apparent unhappiness, just a quiet sadness for the destructive path she had chosen, and a confirmation that sacrificing a solid partnership for a fleeting feeling rarely leads to lasting peace. Her self-discovery, if it had happened at all, seemed to have come at a great cost to her own well-being and relationships. My own life felt stable, peaceful, and genuinely happy. I was content in my work, my friendships were strong, and my relationship with Sarah was growing into something meaningful and enduring. The trauma of the divorce had faded into the background, a part of my history, but no longer the defining feature of my present. One day, I received an unexpected email. It was from Clara. My heart gave a little jolt. I hadn't heard from her directly since the divorce was finalized. I hesitated for a long time before opening it. What could she possibly want? The email was short and formal. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. It was more of a reflection. She wrote that she had been doing a lot of thinking, and she realized that she hadn't handled things well. She acknowledged that she had caused me pain and that she was sorry for the way she had blindsided me and dismissed my feelings. She didn't mention Julian by name, but she alluded to the fact that things hadn't turned out the way she expected, and that she now understood the value of the stability and partnership we had shared. It wasn't a request to reconcile, or even to talk. It was just an acknowledgement. A small crack in the wall of defensiveness she had built. Reading it brought a strange mix of emotions. There was a sense of validation. She finally, after all this time, acknowledged the pain she had caused. There was also a sense of sadness for her, for the apparent unhappiness that had led her to this reflection. And there was a quiet sense of peace. It wasn't the grand apology I might have once craved, but it was something. A small, belated recognition of the reality of what had happened. I didn't reply immediately. I thought about it for several days. What purpose would a reply serve? To express my lingering hurt? To tell her about my life now? Neither felt necessary. My healing wasn't dependent on her apology or her validation. It had happened independently, through my own efforts and the support of people who truly cared about me. Ultimately, I decided not to reply. The chapter was closed. Her email was a postscript, a small addition to a story that had already ended. I wished her well, in a detached, abstract way. I hoped she found whatever she was looking for, genuinely this time. But her journey was no longer intertwined with mine. My focus remained on my own path, on my relationship with Sarah, on my work, on my friendships, on the quiet satisfaction of the life I had rebuilt. The rain outside my window is falling again, a soft, steady rhythm. It's just rain. A familiar sound in the city I call home. My home, a place of peace,